Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Creation Myths. What you're going to see here is the conversation on COVID origins that I had on Jackson Wheat's channel with Jon Perry from Stated Clearly. This was originally from June of 2025, and I've linked the original conversation on Jackson Wheat's channel down below. You should 100% go subscribe to Jackson if you aren't already. Now, I found this conversation to be incredibly frustrating. With creationists, I know what I'm getting into, but real science communicators, really excellent science communicators, should meet a much higher standard. I have never lost my cool with a creationist, but this conversation did it, and you'll see how. Now, to be clear, SARS coronavirus 2 was a zoonotic crossover. It's not the result of a lab leak. There's no evidence of a lab leak, and a lab leak is, as of now, a conspiracy theory. Valid to investigate earlier in the pandemic. We investigated, there's no evidence. Now it's a conspiracy theory. So I think that's enough introduction. Enjoy this conversation. Thanks for watching.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. We got a fun show for you all today. I'm sure that you are all just as fun about it as I am, because we are all going to be fun here. Okay. We have 17 people watching right off the bat. It's not bad. Okay. Well, it is I, your favorite Jackson, the good Jackson, not the bad one we watch on Dapper Show. And today, joining me, we have Dan Stern Cardinal of Creation Myths. Welcome, welcome. How you doing?
I'm great. Hello. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, long time no see, as we said. If you didn't see it yesterday, why the heck not? You need to go watch me be really bad at trivia over on Dan's channel at Creation Myths, which is in the description. And then we also have Jon Perry. Welcome back to the show.
Yes, glad to be here.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good.
Good. And we may or may not have one Nestlig. We are not sure right now. He is having internet problems, so we'll see if that improves. Okay, which is sad. He's very excited about this show, and then of course his internet dies, which happens to me all the time. So I get it.
So it goes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we are discussing today the origin of SARS-CoV-2. We're talking about different hypotheses for how the virus originated. And of course, this is the virus that causes the symptoms, the collection of symptoms known as COVID-19, right? So we'll see if this video gets demonetized and nixed from having this conversation, but who knows, right?
No, it won't. That stuff's over, I think.
Here's hoping.
So I did an animation about it, about COVID, before COVID was accepted by Trump and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I made an animation for Stated Clearly, where do new viruses come from? And it was about the various ideas of how people think that COVID came about, but it focused almost exclusively on the natural origin hypothesis. I just mentioned the other ones in the start. Back then, they demonetized it immediately. So It sucks because it got no views until Trump announced that COVID was a thing and we had to shut down stuff. Then it got 4 million views overnight. And then they finally responded to my request to get money put back on it. And then they finally agreed that it was fine, but I didn't get any money for it because I missed the wave. So
yeah,
It was insane. But yeah, that's probably the most viral video I've made for a full animation. But it was just because it happened. It was the only thing on YouTube at the time when America started flipping out. So it was just kind of a luck that I was sitting there already. But
yeah, that was a crazy time. Yeah, who could have seen it coming? And then here we are, 5 years later. Fun times.
But if we can watch the whole thing, if we can at least watch
how long is
the start of it, but maybe the whole thing. It's been a long time since I watched it, but it will give people. This is so politically charged now. The argument that I'm here to make is that the lab leak was never crazy. That it was a very bad idea for people to demonize that. It was never crazy. Today, the evidence is pretty strong that it was actually a natural origin, but it's still not fully ruled out. But at that time, it was definitely not ruled out. And yeah, that's the argument I'm going to make. But people hate that argument a lot. I noticed. So I feel like it's good to show people that, hey, I've done this. I've done a full video that was very important early on, helping calm people down a little bit. So yeah, I
Well,
think it's worth watching that animation.
yeah, I think we should watch it. I don't entirely disagree. I think early in the pandemic, it was certainly perfectly reasonable to make a lab leak argument, since there is a lab that studies coronaviruses in the city where the pandemic originated. Like anyone looking at that could go, yeah, okay, that seems reasonable. And then we got like years worth of data and like viral genome sequences and everything. And by like mid to late 2021, it was extraordinarily clear that it did not come from the lab, based on the natural sequences, the early pandemic sequences, the lab sequences that we had, all their coronaviruses from 2018. And then you also couple that with the epidemiological data of where the early cases clustered, which was around the market, not the lab, the absence of early cases from the lab, and combined with just how viral handling works in a lab like that, with an airborne virus, even at biosafety level 2, there's just no plausible pathway. So I agree that it is a perfectly reasonable thing to look into, and the history shows that among like evolutionary virologists, there was a lot of interest early on in the lab leak hypothesis, and several years worth of really careful, diligent digging into where this virus came from. And within a couple of years, it was settled, and it has been settled, that it clearly came from natural coronavirus populations infecting bats. And the lab leak at this point is a conspiracy theory, just straight up. Like, that's all it's got going for it.
Well,
Yeah.
see, the reason that I disagree with that is that, okay, so technically, at this point, if it's true, it would either have to be an insane coincidence, and we'll go over this when I show the slides, or it would have to be technically a conspiracy theory in that a bunch of people conspired to cover it up.
Right.
But that term is very inappropriate. Like, what comes with that term, it's like saying that the Native Americans protesting the pipeline were terrorists in, like, was it 2005? Because they lit some stuff on fire. They were labeled terrorists, which is technically true. They terrorized a construction site. But then what that did in the public is it just screwed up everyone's brains. Like, oh, these Native Americans, they're terrorists now. And that's what this conspiracy word does. Well,
if we can, we should break that down then, because we could go through and what would be necessary for it to have come from the lab.
Can I get a mic check? Am I audible?
You are audible.
We can hear you.
All right. So
sorry
about that.
Let's watch.
For some reason, my internet is being weird. Yeah.
Well,
let's watch that video. I'll go through slides and then we'll talk about it.
Before we do that, I want to ask just one small question, John, just so like we can start off and just like, I know where you're coming from, because we've never had this conversation before. So in preparing for this conversation, I found a Twitter conversation with you and Jackson. And so this was from May 10th. This is like, what, 4 weeks ago, give or take? You said,
something like that, yeah.
This is what you wrote. You said, there's no direct evidence it leaked from the lab, but the lab is 10 miles from the alleged epicenter. They were doing passage experiments in humanized mice. They were bringing thousands of viruses into the city. And I don't know how to say this guy's name. Dazak? How do you say that?
Dazak.
Anyway,
Dazak
has a well-documented history of lying. That's not nothing. So I just want to check with you if that's still kind of where you're at, that in terms of like the physical evidence, there's no evidence it came from the lab, but there are these other suspicious things.
Yes, yeah. There's no evidence, and as we'll hear when we look at the slides, the reason there's no evidence is because we have not been allowed to look. No one has been allowed to look.
That's not true. That's where we get into conspiracy theory land.
That's absolutely true. But
we'll the 20
go into this.
They have the sequences from 2018, and it's not like that. Like, John, you are a very good science communicator. You are a very good science communicator, but this is a conspiracy theory, just straight up. Because in order for this, they're hiding the sequences. There's stuff in the lab that we don't know about. In order for that to be the case, that would have to involve thousands of people on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. Yes, it would.
It would absolutely not.
Absolutely. So there would be secret research going on at this lab for years that not one person ever said, "Hey."
Even before the outbreak, there would have been years of cover-up before the outbreak to cover this mysterious
That is
precursor.
false. That is not
That's
true.
absolutely true. So do you think that in the 2018 draft that they ultimately didn't publish, but it's out there with all the sequences of all the coronaviruses they had at the time, do you think they're hiding coronavirus genomes that they had that were not in that list of viruses from 2018?
This lab was collecting samples from all
No,
over
please
the
just
country.
answer that question. Do you think they were hiding sequences from that 2018 draft?
From which 2018 draft? You
The
mean
the
fuse?
draft that they were preparing for publication in 2018 that involved as a supplement all of the coronavirus genome data that they had, all the sequences.
No, I don't think
You
they're
don't-
hiding
okay.
that. No.
Okay. So what's the
Here, look, if we do, you don't want to see the animation, apparently.
I mean,
Okay, go ahead.
I don't want to be a party to spreading conspiracy theories. And this sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Okay. Well, you haven't even looked at it. So you're just
I would
making
like to
shit up.
because see, let me ask you this question. Is there any discussion in this video of the phylogenetic data of the natural populations, the early outbreak
Just
genomes,
play the
lab?
animation, please.
Let's do it and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, how much of it do you want played? Do you want like the first?
I think. Well, actually, because I've now been labeled a conspiracy theorist, let's do the whole thing. Because
How long is it?
It's 10 minutes.
Okay, all right. Peter, is it queued up? Can you guys see it?
If you've been watching the news, you've probably heard of the novel or new coronavirus, which, starting in late 2019, began making people ill in China. International air travel has since allowed it to spread person to person to new countries, as governments began to issue travel restrictions and even quarantines. Speculations about the origin of the virus began to spread online. Some claim that the virus might be a genetically modified weapon, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This claim currently seems highly unlikely. Others suggest that the virus may be an escaped lab specimen. Now, this actually is possible. Viruses have escaped from research labs in the past, but as of the time that I'm recording this voiceover, investigations into this idea have not yet reached any solid conclusions. Could there be another, more natural explanation for the origin of this virus? The answer is yes. COVID-19, the new human-infecting coronavirus, may have simply evolved from an older animal-infecting coronavirus. To understand how this may have happened, let's first take a look at viruses in general. What are viruses? Of the many things that can make you sick by infecting and reproducing inside you, viruses are among the smallest. If we resize this drawing to a more realistic scale, you see that hundreds of viruses can fit inside a single bacterial cell. That's how tiny they are. Thousands of different viral species have been studied and described by scientists so far. Millions more likely exist. They come in many forms, but all species consist of a small collection of genes, stretches of either DNA or RNA that carry information for making more copies of the virus, and those genes are enclosed in a protective coating of protein and sometimes a lipid membrane. All known viruses are parasitic, but most are not parasitic to humans. Instead, some only target plant cells, others only infect bacteria, and so on. A virus reproduces by getting its genes into a living cell. Different viruses do this in different ways, but once inside, the cell acts as if the viral genes are its own genes. It begins reading them and building copies of the virus instead of performing its normal tasks. Coronaviruses are a huge family of virus species that infect animal cells. Some infect chickens, others infect pigs, some infect humans, but most of them are extremely mild. They simply give you the common cold. Corona means crown and refers to the unusually large crown-like spikes sticking out of their membranes. These protein spikes are selectively sticky, sort of like Velcro. They don't attach to most objects but are extremely sticky when they bump into specific molecules found on the outsides of animal cells. Once held firmly in place, the coronavirus waits until swallowed by the cell. It then begins to reproduce at the cell's expense. Different animal species have different types of molecules on the outsides of their cells. Because of this, bird-infecting coronaviruses usually can't infect humans. Their Velcro doesn't hold strong enough to our cells. Unfortunately, the natural process of evolution can sometimes help a virus overcome this problem. When virus genes are being copied during reproduction, mutations can occur. These are either due to simple copying errors or processes called reassortment and recombination. These happen when two or more viruses infect a single cell. In most cases, mutations that change the shape of viral spikes render the virus useless. Their Velcro no longer sticks to any host cells. On rare occasions, however, a chance mutation will just happen to allow a virus to attach to a new host species. If the modified virus is then lucky enough to encounter that new host species, infection can occur. We call this a spillover infection. The virus has spilled over into a new type of host. Early on, during a spillover event, the virus usually isn't very good at infecting its new host. Its Velcro is not a perfect match, and many other challenges might slow the virus down. Oftentimes, the mutations that let it infect the new host also make it worse at infecting its original host. Because of this, many spillover viruses go extinct after infecting just 1 or 2 people. They're usually dead ends. That said, if the virus can survive and reproduce just long enough, natural selection will promote any new mutations that help it better spread and reproduce in the new host population. Positive mutations accumulate over multiple generations, negative mutations are discarded until, bam, a new epidemic is being screamed about on the news. Though it may seem to us that these new viruses just sort of pop into existence overnight, scientists now know there is a long, slow burn before each explosion. Genetic evidence tells us that slowly evolving spillovers have been the cause of almost every major outbreak known in history. In the early 2000s, a coronavirus that used to only infect bats appears to have spilled over into civets. There, it mutated even further and spilled over into humans. We called it the SARS virus because it causes severe acute respiratory syndrome. It spread internationally from person to person, and several scientists were infected in the lab. By the time the virus was contained, over 8,000 people had been infected, over 700 died. A coronavirus from camels also recently spilled over to humans, causing even more deaths. Coronaviruses are not the only types of animal viruses that can adapt to new hosts. HIV spilled over from chimps, most likely when someone cut themselves while preparing chimp meat for dinner. The swine flu came partly from pigs, but we think it actually evolved through a recombination with a pig virus and a bird virus. The 1918 Spanish flu, the big one that devastated populations all around the world, may have spilled over from chickens. While the evidence is not yet conclusive, the new coronavirus might just be one more example of normal evolution. A very similar virus has been found in bats, and another was recently discovered in pangolins. These animals are endangered, they're protected, but they're often used illegally for food, rituals, and alternative medicine in the region where COVID-19 first broke out. Now, there are serious people checking to make sure that the virus did not come from a lab, either by accident or on purpose. After all, the technology to genetically modify viruses really does exist, but it's important to understand that the normal process of descent with modification, acted upon by natural selection, really does produce new viruses. It happens naturally. The chance of a virus evolving to successfully infect a new species is extremely low, but there are over 7.5 billion people on this planet. Most of us interact with animals on a daily basis. We keep them as pets, we eat them as food. This means that, as unlikely as spillover infections might be, there are billions of opportunities for one to take hold every single day. Add this to the fact that the entire world is now connected through international flights, and you realize that what happens in Vegas doesn't actually stay in Vegas, at least not the way that it used to. Luckily, we have international groups like the World Health Organization and various centers for disease control to help contain outbreaks when they happen. With international cooperation, we have prevented many catastrophes in the past, and we will prevent many more in the future, so long as our species continues to work together. So, in summary, where do new viruses come from? In most cases, new viruses evolve from old viruses. Stopping the spread of new viruses requires international cooperation. For up-to-date, accurate information on the risks, visit the World Health Organization website at who.int. I am Jon Perry, and that is the novel coronavirus, stated clearly.
Okay. Alrighty.
I
So
think I have seen this video before. Yeah.
Yeah, that video launched shortly after the Lancet letter was published, and because of that, I got hundreds of emails of people telling me I need to take it down because I'm spreading conspiracy theories. So I've been hearing this since the start of COVID, but it was absolutely not a conspiracy theory to mention that viruses can leak from labs.
Yeah, I
This
agree.
is so
But now it is. For this virus, now it is. But back
It's-
then it wasn't. I agree.
So technically you're right. So that right now, in order for the data that we have, in order for a lab leak to have still been possible, people have to be okay. There are some weird situations that could also be a case where there's not a bunch of people conspiring together. But in order for the data that we currently have, and let me pull up my slides here on where I show some of this. In order for the data that we currently have,
Which slide do you want us to pull up?
The lab leak not fully dismissed.
Peter. Okay, there it is.
Is it up? It's up now. Okay. So if you go to the second slide here. So this is Francis Collins. This is his most recent conversation about this. He was the head of the National Institutes of Health, and he says, there's a bunch of things here. Maybe I should read the whole thing, but we'll just read the highlighted part here. There continues to be speculation, however, that the naturally occurring virus might have been secretly under study in the Wuhan Institute of Virology and somehow escaped. There is no concrete evidence to support this, but the Chinese government has stonewalled efforts to examine lab notebooks or other materials that might shed light on what really happened. So this lab leak possibility has to be considered. But the simplest synthesis of the current data is that the naturally occurring virus spread from bats to an intermediate host, possibly a raccoon dog, and then infected humans in the west corner of the I can't pronounce that, Wuhan market, where wild animals were being butchered. Unfortunately, this topic of COVID origins has been a contentious and hyper-partisan issue, leading to further polarization of our divided country and scapegoating and threatening of scientists. And that has been absolutely horrible. Like, scientists have been threatened in China, they've been threatened here, and actually on both sides of this too. Like, people have been threatened.
Right.
People are forming mobs, and now we have Trump, who just puts up this website claiming that it's case closed, it was a lab, and it's obnoxious. And if you look at the evidence that he gives, the conclusion does not follow from the evidence that he gives.
Well, and they haven't updated anything. I was looking for because the head of the CIA that Trump appointed was like, actually, we're 100% certain that it was a lab leak, but he didn't provide anything. Literally the only report I've seen to date was the one put together by Avril Haines that essentially said there was no evidence for a lab leak. But aside from hers, I have not seen a single report put out by any government institutions about it, which I think is rather odd.
Yeah. So the only way to really consider it a lab leak, well, actually, if we go to the next slide real quick. This is just showing how close the seafood market is to one of the campuses of the lab. This is where some coronavirus research happens. Other coronavirus research happens 3 miles south of here. But you can see that they're only 12 miles apart by car. It's 20-minute drive. So that's been like since the start, that's been a huge red flag for like, holy crap, this might have been us because they're so close. But it's amazing. If we go to the next slide, you'll see Mike Warraby's work here. Mike Warraby, by the way, I worked with him on a video like 11 years ago on the origin of AIDS. He's always taken lab leak stuff seriously. And maybe I should just briefly talk about the history of that. But first, let me just talk about this map here. These are early cases of COVID. Now, the problem is all this was given to us by China a year later, and they didn't let us check things. But this is all the early cases of COVID. And it's very obvious that if this data is correct, it's very obvious that this virus either originated in the market or that was the first super spreader event is in that market. And it's really weird. I mean, it's only 12 miles away from the lab, but it's a long 12 miles in a city this populated. It's very weird that the virus would not be spreading around the lab, but it would be spreading around a market that sells wild animals that can also cause an outbreak.
Can I comment on that for a second? Because we have additional data on the possibility that that was just an early super spreader event rather than the initial epicenter. And the relevant data there are you could actually go to blood banks from blood donors from September through November in that city. And there are no signs of COVID infection in those blood donors prior to the outbreak with the epicenter in the market. So it is extraordinarily unlikely that basically, as certain as we can get in science, there was not some background level of viral spread prior to that outbreak at the market.
Yeah. Now, so I said earlier that there's like it's either a big cover up, a quite large cover up. It wouldn't really require all the thousands of people, I don't think, that it might seem. But it would definitely be a cover-up where you've got top researchers that are sitting down and saying, how do we fool the rest of the world scientists, which would be extremely difficult and extremely risky. So it either has to be a cover-up like that.
Include all those people working underneath them. They also have to be quiet for some reason.
Yep,
as well.
all the lab staff, all the clerical staff, the peer reviewers.
Not as hard as you think in China because the culture of not asking questions. But they did this in 2003. This is why you have people like Tom Cotton, who's obnoxious, but he's super is like, oh, it's China, it's the communists. It's like he came from the 1950s.
Right.
But he's, in 2003.
If I may, we need to establish something like if the virus came from the lab, the virus itself or a precursor of the virus had to be there, right? But we have no record of a precursor.
Hey, Jackson, can we take down the slides so we can see each other talking?
Oh,
yeah, Peter, if you could go back to the before.
We have no record. We have no record of that, but also we don't have like what Francis Collins has pointed out multiple times is that they will not let us look at their actual records in their lab. They stonewalled us. They would not let the WHO investigate the lab. They waited a year before they even let the WHO have boots on the ground.
So we do have other so we have all their sequences as of 2018. Now it's possible they collected viruses secretly in between and we don't have access to those sequences. Certainly possible, but again, now we're in, people are lying about stuff, right?
No.
Hang on. We have other data that's informative though, because what we do have, because one entity that did actually take the possibility quite seriously early on was the people at the lab itself. And so what they did relatively early in 2020 is they did antibody tests for everybody, basically as soon as they could, to see if anybody at the lab had been infected by this coronavirus. And in order for the lab leak to be true, somebody working at the lab has to be the index case. There had to be somebody there who got sick with COVID extraordinarily early in the pandemic, right? And
True.
as of early 2020, when they did these tests, nobody in the lab had yet been infected with coronavirus, which again, they might be lying, but now we have a whole nother layer of people that have to be involved in covering it up.
And also, I would like to point out in the report by the Director of National Intelligence, they pointed out that nobody, they reinforced that conclusion that nobody at the lab had symptoms that were like conclusive for COVID.
No. The one other possibility, and I think this is also extremely unlikely, is that people that worked at the lab lived next to the market, which is extremely unlikely, even though it's only like 10 miles away. People just don't do that. People don't commute to work in China very often. People almost always live right next to where they work. They usually walk or ride their bike to work. It would be very, I mean, it's possible, but it'd be very weird. So that's,
and there's like public transit, train stations and stuff all in between. If there's going to be an outbreak, it's going to be in those places, not
Right.
at the market.
yeah, it really would seem that way. Yeah. But I mean, the most of the early cases were the apartment buildings across the street from the market. So that's, I mean, China wouldn't tell us who lives there. China didn't want to tell the world where everybody who works in their lab lives for obvious reasons.
Yeah,
Sure.
they also initially lied about there not being like certain kind of mammals present in the market that were that are known to be infectious.
Yeah.
So rather than focus on what we don't know or what we may not know based on what we can or can't learn from information released from China, let's focus on what we know for sure.
Okay, here's what we know for sure.
Well, hang on. No, I'm going to ask you if we agree on things. Hang on. That wasn't an invitation. That was me. Let me ask you if we can agree on certain things, right?
Okay.
So, based on just the genome sequences that we have, we know that the sister taxa to the early outbreak strains is a bat coronavirus. As far as all the data we have, we know that the early outbreak strains, and I mean all of it, but the early ones in particular, nest within the bat coronaviruses, right?
Mm-hmm.
The earliest known cases were at the market that we've been talking about. The virus itself, samples of the virus were found from the market in like drain pipes and stuff in that corner where they keep the animals. So do we agree on all that?
It was already January, but yeah.
That was right. So that might have been, but it was there, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. On the other side of things, we don't have any known viral samples at the lab that are a close relative to the pandemic strain. The closest one is 96% similar.
Not even a sequence.
Well, hang on. Yeah, and right, it wasn't a secret, but so the closest one was 96% sequence identity, which was over 1,000 nucleotides different. There were no early infections in the lab that we know of based on the early 2020 antibody tests. And then in terms of just how viral research works, John, I apologize. I don't know your background in terms of like this stuff. Like, and for everyone else here, is people familiar with how like viral storage, and we talk about passaging on humanized mouse cells, does everybody know how that works? Because the way this works is you have the viruses, they're frozen in liquid, and then they're grown up on the cells, either in, depending on what type of virus, it's either on a petri dish culture or in a liquid culture. And this is an airborne virus. So putting aside do they have the virus? Do they not have the virus at the lab? There's no vector to get the virus from the way it is handled in the lab into a person's lungs, because it's stored in liquid media or solid media. And unless it's actively being passaged, it's frozen. So there's no, like, there was a biosafety level 2 lab, which is not a super high, it's like level 4 is like the spacesuits, right? With like Ebola and stuff. Level 2 is, I think you just like wear a mask, like it's fairly low intensity stuff. Like rabies is a biosafety level 2 virus because it's not airborne. It doesn't transmit that way. So there's no danger to it in that environment. And when you're passaging a virus like this, it's the same deal. There's simply no airborne exposure to it. So putting aside all of the other stuff we talked about, there's no like vector for exposure in a person in a laboratory environment for this type of virus doing the types of experiments they were doing. There's just no way physically for that to happen unless like they, spill like a lot of it because it's at very low concentrations when it's being stored. And it gets like in someone's mouth or something. Like it's really strains credulity to even figure out how this transfer would happen in a laboratory environment.
It happened twice in 2003 in Beijing. It happened again in Taiwan, and it happened again in Singapore. It happened once with COVID itself in a lab. I can't remember. I think it was in Korea.
But were those being passaged on like for experimentally, or was that a different?
Yeah.
thing?
Well, in all these cases, it was. So for the SARS ones, it was after we knew that SARS was a thing, and they were doing all sorts of stuff with it. But what we learned about what that laboratory does is that, I mean, we know that they were not just putting stuff in cells and petri dishes. They were also putting stuff in humanized mice, which that's usually how people get sick, because they'll get bit by a mouse that's infected, or you can actually get it through the air if you take your mask off once you have infected animals in your lab. With humanized mice, the big concern with that is like, well, you could have even started. So, okay, you were talking about the sequences that we have in the labs. Like, we don't have any record of them having a sequence closely related to this on hand. That's true, but they had just thousands of actual physical samples as well. And actually, we don't even know how many they had because we weren't allowed to look. But
well, can I jump in for a moment?
Yeah.
Because the most samples that they have is like feces, right, and anal swabs of bats.
Yes,
and
I don't think they ever had live bats.
Yeah, because and there's also those samples are not like they don't give you viable viruses to like as a high risk for infections, because like what they do is they extract the RNA and do metagenomics. And when you do that,
usually
there is no live virus left over.
Usually, but Wiv was isolating viruses.
Always, well. like always, like when you extract the RNA, there is no live virus anymore.
No, they were actually extracting live viruses. That they have, I think it's one paper where they for sure extracted a live virus. That was one of the goals that they were not good at actually getting viruses booted up in their lab. Barrick's lab was very good at this, but they did through reverse genetics. They were able to revive some or whatever you call it.
They basically reproduced the virus from the genome that they had on the computer, basically. Yeah, like it's not extracting the live virus from the feces itself.
And unless they're lying about the viruses they have, because in order to do that, they need the genome sequence. So unless they're lying about the viruses they have, there's no virus that's a close relative at the lab prior to the outbreak.
Published, right? But they don't publish it until they're done usually.
Well, there was that draft from 2018 that had all the sequences in there.
It had every sequence that they had.
That unless we're going to hypothesize that they're hiding them.
Yeah.
But also, so basically the scenario you propose is like they sequenced something, and then they reverse engineered the virus to become alive again, basically, and they never published that work.
Well, okay, but then there's the other thing that you're not thinking of is the fact that these people are going out and collecting samples all over China. So they're directly interacting with bats, and then they're coming back into town. That's another area where you can get an infection.
But you would need an intermediate host.
That's not a lab leak. That's basically like you're infected by a virus. Oh, never mind. Go ahead. Dan.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's not a lab leak. Then that's just coincidence that it's the lab workers that did it. But if they get infected in the field by a bat, that's not a lab leak.
It's a research related pandemic.
Right, but that's different. If somebody goes out in the field and gets a coronavirus, and then a week later they're coughing and sneezing, wandering around the market, and they infect other people, that's not a lab leak. Yeah. They got infected in the field, right?
But also, I believe we also have tested people who live near these bat caves in like Laos and the Yunnan province, and they show like antibodies against various coronaviruses. So these spillovers happen regularly, but the vast majority of them, thank goodness, don't lead to a pandemic, basically. So That happens regularly. So you're saying that just by sheer coincidence, it just happened to be a lab technician who is being very careful not to infect themselves. Not a random farmer. A lab technician carried the pandemic starting.
Let me rewind and explain to you. Maybe you weren't here when I said this. The evidence is that this came about from the market. That's what the bulk of the evidence leads to. But there is no way, because we have been stonewalled by China, according to Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci, by the way, he also has parroted this. We cannot rule out a lab leak. Francis Collins said, this is his interview on June 3rd, under oath.
On what basis?
Anthony Fauci says, I've also been very, very clear, said multiple times, that I don't think the concept of there being a lab leak is inherently a conspiracy theory. And then Francis Collins says,
he's wrong about that.
We cannot yet rule it out because we've been stonewalled by China. And this sounds mean, it sounds like we don't trust Chinese people, or are we all racist or something?
But in 2003, we don't trust Chinese people. We don't trust the government specifically, sorry.
Yeah,
we don't trust the government.
In 2003, there really was a cover-up in China. Involved lots and lots of scientists and doctors, and there was finally one of the doctors, what was his name, Yang Young. He finally he went to I don't think he went directly to the New York Times. He tried sending a letter first to Chinese newspapers, but they wouldn't publish it. But he's like, the government is saying there's 12 cases. I've got 60 just at my hospital, and other doctors are reporting more. So basically, and also the World Health Organization had to go to China and say, we know from back channels that you have an outbreak. When are you going to tell us? So that's why there's this lack of trust. And that's why we can't, until we have full cooperation, we can't solidly rule this out. It's very unlikely. In order for this to be where it started, it has to be crazy coincidences, or it has to be a very complicated cover-up. Not thousands of people, but it has to be very complicated.
Well,
I mean, experts had to be in cahoots, and they had to plant data, most likely.
Right.
It's pretty absurd. It's very risky. I don't think China would risk doing that, because that would be an insane embarrassment. But as Colin says, we can't rule it out because we're being stonewalled, and this is still the case in 2025.
So, John, I hear you, and I'm sympathetic to that point of view, especially because it's difficult, in the practice of science to really rule anything out definitively. That is a challenging thing to do, more so when you strongly suggest you don't have complete data. Those are fair points. But if you were to go back and play back the thing that you just said, could you understand why to a lot of people that sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? It checks all those boxes of you would have to have a number of people coordinating at various levels in the scientific community, in governments, we're talking, just like the clerical staff at the lab. There wasn't a janitor that never mentioned, hey, there's this one weird wing that I'm not allowed in. I'm never allowed to clean that one room. There's a lot of people that would have to have, we're talking hiding either viral samples or genome sequences in the lab. So there's the OK sequences, and there's the don't put these in the database sequences, which, by the way, if it came from the lab, we don't know which one's going to cause an outbreak. So we don't know why we're hiding this set versus that set, because who knows which ones are going to cause an outbreak beforehand, right?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a secret department for some reason.
Then you have to be hiding cases of the disease among the lab workers. You have to be faking or hiding antibody tests, because they did all get tested early on for antibodies to the virus. You have to be, when we're looking at the early publications here with the phylogenetic data, those papers have robust supplemental documents that have all the publicly accessible sequence data and everything. Those would be have to be manipulated, or hiding sequences from those. There's a whole lot of stuff that has to go on. We're talking multiple different entities with multiple different groups of people, not just the top 20 virologists in the world that would have to have been coordinating very quickly in order to obscure the true origins of this virus, if that is actually the case. Now, what I just said,
to do it. They would have only had a year to do this.
Right. So do you understand, though, why the stuff that I just described, people can reasonably describe that as a conspiracy theory, right?
Again, let me rewind this conversation. I literally said that this is technically a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
However, that term is used to gaslight people who are concerned because they understand a strong, consistent history of behavior. This has been happening in China since 2003. They've been covering up data, fabricating data, hiding data.
How do we know they're doing that?
This is not crazy.
But how do we know they're doing that? Because we know they did it in the past because it came out, right?
Yes.
So it's been 5 years. That's longer than the time it took for original SARS when there was manipulation going on.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the evidence of that then?
So you have, we don't have evidence of it. What we have evidence
that's
of.
my point. The lack of evidence becomes evidence. That is textbook conspiracy.
I'm going to say this so slow so that everyone can understand. We have not ruled it out because we are being stonewalled. We can't rule it out until we stop being stonewalled. That is the argument that I'm making.
Okay, so can I okay, I'm going to try to mediate here. Okay. I think we are in agreement on the basic points is what it seems to me. It seems to me from listening to this back and forth, we are all in agreement that the best evidence is that all the evidence, right, is in favor of the market. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it seems that's what we're saying, that we all in agreement on that. And so the differences here, right, is on the difference is more on the issue of Jon is saying that he is identifying concern, or Dan's saying, and again, there's agreement that there's not this, that there is no evidence for this. So where do we go from that conclusion? So if we can acknowledge that some people have concerns, okay, we can say, okay, that's fair, whatever, or it was at one point. How do we go from that to a to okay, here's what the data is? How do we make that bridge?
Well, so the reason that I've been talking about this online is because I keep seeing people, and this has happened from the very start, that people were accused, they were being silenced, they were being demonetized, they were being attacked.
Right, and none of that's happening anymore, right? Like, people aren't getting demonetized anymore. I mean, all of the major
I still keep seeing people making fun of people who think this could have come from a lab.
Sure, but like Meta,
education.
I mean, I don't
like everybody.
Let me just say,
all
Jon,
the billionaires.
Hang on, Jackson. Let me just say, I hope I'm not coming across as making fun of you.
You labeled me a conspiracy theorist in the first 2 minutes of this before you.
I said no. I didn't call you. I said this is the way this is operating in the world right now is a conspiracy theory, right? That is, it operates as a conspiracy theory.
That term.
I hope I didn't call you a conspiracy
theorist. That's like
theorist,
saying that Native Americans are terrorists.
Okay.
It's gaslighting.
It's an emotive term. Okay, so we like Jon is saying it's an emotive term.
Let's establish a definition then. So how would you define as a conspiracy, Jon?
I've told you. Do I have to tell you again?
It meets the technical definition of a conspiracy theory.
Yes, it does. Yeah. But Native Americans were technically being terrorists when they lit a construction site on fire.
Right.
So it doesn't make it wrong, is what you're saying.
It's a way.
So basically, your objection is on the grounds of political incorrectness. That's basically your objection.
It's on defamation. It's a way to dismiss someone's argument without
sure, it's emotive.
to it. It's just name calling. It's petty. It's stupid. We need to stop doing this.
Do you feel like I've dismissed your argument without considering data? Because I feel like I've tried to make sure that I'm backing up what I'm saying with specific data.
Sorry, ask the question again.
I said, do you feel like I'm dismissing the lab leak argument on the grounds that it's a conspiracy theory rather than on the basis of data?
In short term, yes, but
because I feel like I'm here. We went through things like phylogenetics and sequence similarity and nesting, and the distribution of early cases, like those are specific data points that point against a lab leak. And that's the basis on which I conclude that the lab leak did not happen, right? It's not the manner of the conversation that's happening out in the world is not how I'm drawing the conclusion and how I argue against a lab leak, right? It's based on, here's the data we have. This is the most reasonable conclusion to draw from those data.
Yeah, but the way you started this video is by just labeling everyone that thinks otherwise as a conspiracy theorist. That's what's inappropriate. That's if we're science communicators, we need to stop just calling people, just labeling people, and just deal with the issues that they're having.
Oh,
Okay.
In this case,
So
the
this
issue
is an issue.
So,
but this
to
is
Dan's question,
sorry,
is
Jackson.
there data that you feel Dan has dismissed?
Well, what's being dismissed here is just the long history of lab leaks being covered up.
From the moderator position, as I'm trying to hear on both sides here, it seemed that Dan's response to that was that the time it took to show that those things were in fact being covered up was a substantially smaller amount of time than the time that has now passed between the origin of, or the outbreak of COVID and today. Do you think that is a reasonable rebuttal, or do you think that is an unreasonable rebuttal?
Well, you would have to ask someone in the intelligence community who understands how cover-ups work and how they're working right now in China.
Do you consider the report by Avril Haines to be? Do you think that she dismissed important data, or that the National Intelligence Committee has dismissed important data? Because when she authored that report back in 2023, yes, back in 2023, she noted, or they noted, the team noted that they looked at this data and they concluded that at present time there wasn't yet evidence for it, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah, at present time there's still not evidence for it.
Okay,
yes.
so
And not that we've been given. I mean, unless intelligence agencies are just holding stuff back.
Sure, right. So,
like, if Biden had made the website that Trump made, then I would be like, oh, they must know something we don't know. But since it was Trump who made that website, I'm like, he's just, if you give him an inch, he takes a mile.
Yeah,
it's freaking absurd.
So it does seem like we are all in agreement on the basis of the facts.
Yes,
is what I understand. Okay, so I can agree that sometimes just people can be dismissed, right, that can happen, but in this case it just seems like at present time we don't have any evidence to substantiate this, and that just seems to be kind of the I mean, I don't know where else to really go from there, is what I'm saying. Does that?
Yeah, again, the 2 points I wanted to make here is that first, a lab leak was never crazy.
Okay.
And then second, it is still not fully ruled out. It's unlikely, but it's not fully ruled out. So and it won't be until we have full transparency from China and from those labs.
So I mean,
or until we actually find. I mean, the other way that you could rule it out is you actually find the farm with a population of civets or whatever. I think it was raccoon dogs for this one. That'd be another way to do it.
Yeah, you'd have to find the intermediate host. We do have, with reasonably high confidence, we do have the specific bat population that we think the ancestral virus was isolated from.
Mm-hmm.
We have not yet specifically identified the intermediate host population. But yeah, I think we're honing in on raccoon dogs now as the most likely option. But we don't yet have that intermediate. But we have the sister population in bats, where we can be quite confident that based on the level of sequence similarity, it would be quite unlikely for that level of similarity to exist and that to not be the ancestral or source population.
So really, then this conversation is more about, we need to be, simply you would say, less emotive about our language. Would you say that is more kind of what you would like to drive at, John?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the start of this, people were demonetized and censored for proposing this when it was not crazy at all to say this. Like, now that we have more data supporting a natural origin, like,
So,
you know,
John, I would like to ask a question. So, let's analogize this. Let's take ourselves out of COVID, right? Let's draw an analogy because this is clearly, it's a charged conversation. Because it's happening right now, right? So let's go back, 200 years ago. 200 years ago, evolution was proposed for the first time, right? In a framework that we all, recognize now as Darwinian evolution. At the time, right, it would have been, someone could say, like, oh, well, you can't call people who, believe young earth creationism crazy. And okay, that'd be fair, right? Like, everyone or not everyone, a lot of people historically had that idea, believed that up to that point. But then how long after we had, Darwinian evolution, was it okay to still be a member of this position when the evidence did not back them?
And well, the difference there, the obvious difference, is that scientists studying evolution share all their data with the people that are interested in it, which is not what's happening here. It's the data is not being shared, or it's being shared a year late. So you have, it's being shared after being filtered through authority channels.
So right. So my question, like, at what point are we allowed to say, like, well, we don't have the evidence for this. It's not a viable pursuit anymore. At what point do we make that kind of conclusion? Do we wait 10 years, 30 years
for COVID?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, I agree with Francis Collins that until there's full transparency from China, you can never say what happened. There's always going to be ambiguity, and that's how it's going to be. There's going to be ambiguity.
Well, I don't disagree, because we do have a lot of evidence from the virus genomes and the environmental sampling and the sero surveys of the surrounding population. Like, we know that as Dan mentioned previously, we know that the virus did not have a cryptic circulation before it broke out in December. So there is already a lot there. Like, again, you don't need to make the argument that the virus leaked from a lab in order to make the argument that China could be far more open about their information.
I mean, that's a fine thing to say.
I feel like we are like struggling between a Moat and Bailey argument. Like, there is two arguments being played here. So if you want to argue that China should be far more open than they are, yes, we all agree.
Yeah.
But does it mean the lab leak is plausible at this point? No, it's very implausible at this point, considering the evidence that we do have. That's my argument.
So I agree with you that it's very implausible, but it cannot be ruled out.
I mean,
it has not been ruled out, and it cannot be ruled out until we have full transparency.
You mean like hold it on a like?
Well,
what kind
like
of
in an absolutist sort of sense, like we can never be 100% certain that, because like in that case, I think we would all agree in just the sense of like, well, that's how science works, right? We have a hypothesis that we keep testing until we have a better hypothesis. Well, but if that's the case, we're not really saying anything, right? Because I mean, that's just what we do in science.
Right.
In the past, we've been able to find the animal sources, the intermediates, and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. That's lacking here, and it might be because they were all killed. I mean, one of the problems is that everybody was scared that it was them, so they all, like, every little company, everybody who could have been to blame for this was like, oh crap, and they got rid of their animals. They cleaned they wiped stuff clean.
Right. Sure.
Also,
it was a panic.
Like these people remember SARS-1, so that's.
But also in the
panic,
past,
probably,
also in the past, where there has been misbehavior, malfeasance, misdirection, whatever, with regard to the origin of an outbreak, we've been able to detect that, and we haven't. Like, we've talked to the reason we could say, oh, we can't trust them, yada, yada, yada. The reason we can say that is because we know from the past that there has been misinformation, because it has come out, because somebody has blabbed, because the scientific community went, that doesn't seem right. And now it's been 5 years. Where's the whistleblowers? where's the someone looking at this stuff, like legit science? Because, there are cranks everywhere
Yeah.
that, want to point to like this or that. And, all the amateur virologists looking at 2 arginine codons or something, right? But like among, actual evolutionary virologists, people who do this stuff for a living, nobody is looking sideways at this stuff at this point. In 2020, in 2021, there was a robust debate that went on in that community. And it's 2025. That's just not the case anymore. So, why, if there is, I mean, John, you used the word earlier, cover up. So let's not use conspiracy. Let's say cover up instead. If there was a cover up of the real origins, like at what point, what's the statute of limitations on that? When we can say, we've all been looking at this pretty darn hard for however many years, and with SARS-1, with this, with that, which there's other points to be made about other lab associated outbreaks that make them quite different from this outbreak, but that's not relevant right now. But like at some point, we have to be able to say, in the past, there has been malfeasance. We've detected it. We have done the same stuff to try to detect the malfeasance if it's there, and we've come up empty.
Okay, to pretend that because you haven't figured it out, that means you figured it out is obviously wrong. What we have to just do is be like, okay, there's a little bit of ambiguity here left because of this stonewalling, and we just have to accept that. There's ambiguity here. And what does this mean? This means that most likely this came from the wildlife trade. We should clean up how we're doing wildlife stuff. We should really focus on that. And there's a small possibility this is a lab thing. We should be looking at what we're doing in labs and asking hard questions like, is it a good idea to be taking all these samples into a huge city like this? One of the things that Mike Warby's work has discovered is that it's actually it's almost impossible for a virus to jump over to humans successfully outside of a super crowded population. It just dies out before it can get very far. Right. What if we just put these labs further outside the city?
Right. Yeah.
Well, why? So here's the thing with that, though. I'm sympathetic to that point, but if this was in fact a lab leak, this would be the first instance of a novel virus jumping from a lab into human populations. Every other lab leak that has happened, it's been an existing known human pathogen was stored in the lab, and that infected somebody. The one exception to this,
and they were working with a high titer.
Hang on, yeah, right. Well, that too. But the one exception to this that I can think of was in the early 2000s with the discovery of Mimi virus, which had been isolated in the early 90s, but they identified it as a virus in the early 2000s, and that may have caused a couple cases of pneumonia among lab workers before it was classified at. Ironically, I think it was upgraded from biosafety level 1 to biosafety level 2, if I remember my history correctly, because somebody got pneumonia that was suspected to be due to one of the early Mimi virus isolates. Other than that, there have been no novel viral outbreaks via a laboratory leak. And this practice of sampling natural populations and storing the viruses in the labs has been ongoing for a long time. And that tends to happen in large cities in countries where you have these novel viruses that frequently cross over. So you have these things in China with coronaviruses. You have these facilities in sub-Saharan Africa that are constantly surveying Ebola and Marburg among natural populations looking for spillover events. Those natural viral non-human infecting viruses have never once caused an epidemic or a pandemic or even an outbreak from a lab. It's always been something that was stored in the lab that previously was known to infect humans. So that's quite a big difference here.
But this work is happening. It's increasing exponentially. We have more labs all the time.
I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it's never been documented.
Possibility. Again, this has not been ruled out yet. So we can look at this as a possibility. And we can ask, is this appropriate? Is it appropriate for us to put these in huge metropolitan cities with international airports? I don't know how to do that cost-benefit analysis. We tried to do this in 2014, I think is when it was. In the U.S. they had several no one ever got sick, but there was several leaks. Like there was the bird flu ended up at a poultry farm. No one got sick. There was the other one was we found polio just in like an unsafe storage facility. There's a whole list of things that happened, and we're like, whoa, we need to reevaluate how we're doing things, because this was in Atlanta, Georgia, right? Which is like the world's most
Giant
traveled
travel hub,
international.
yeah.
Hey, I 100% agree. I don't want, if I'm living in
Sure.
a densely populated city, I definitely don't want, a institute that studies viruses for a living, downtown where everybody. I 100% agree. I think that's fine. You're right. Cleaning up the market, making it,
But
we shouldn't do those sorts of practices, and also,
And one of the wins from this, which I think ended up being just a total red herring, as far as the origin of COVID, but ended up being very good because we started looking at who is doing this research, was Peter Daszak getting investigated. Because, and I have slides on that, but I don't think we need to go into them. But it was found that he was in charge of this extremely dangerous project of collecting viruses, and he kept on just doing little things to scoot around oversight. And this was revealed through a bunch of emails and through other things, where it was just like, this guy is putting his lab and his ambitions ahead of safety. This is inappropriate. He lost funding. And I'm very glad that was discovered. And this was Democrats and Republicans agreeing, and it was the Biden administration's health department that barred him from getting further grant money. I don't know if his organization should have been barred, but like for sure he should have been reprimanded. It's very good that we found this type of activity. It's super, super dangerous.
So what activity specifically?
I mean, well, it's not relevant. I mean, it was doing coronavirus stuff with SARS-1. I think it was his thing with SARS-1.
It's like you make it sound like it was like very unorthodox, dangerous research, but when I looked it into myself, I found like it seems more typical. Like I believe Ralph Barrick also does something similar, right? In the US.
Yeah, Ralph Barrick works for him, yeah. But Ralph Barrick isn't trying to hide stuff from funders, and he's not trying to scoot around oversight. That's why Peter Daszak got in trouble, because he was trying to scoot around funders. He published a Lancet article. He published a Lancet article, which was the reason that everyone got demonetized. Everyone had their Facebook account shut down because of the Lancet article that he published, saying that any lab leak is a conspiracy. And it turned out that he was writing emails. He planned that whole thing. He was working with the lab. He didn't disclose that he was linked to the lab that was in question of all this. The guy was doing very sketchy things, and he was manipulating consensus. He was gaslighting scientists. He was having it was very bad stuff that he was doing. This was revealed during the trial.
And but they didn't reveal any actual data that's linking any of this bad behavior to SARS coronavirus 2, nor did they uncover any hidden data that linked the lab in Wuhan to SARS coronavirus 2, just to be clear.
Correct. I'm saying it was a red herring for the origin of COVID, but not for the importance of reevaluating what we're doing in these labs and what oversight looks like.
Never anything wrong with reevaluating that and dealing with oversight and stuff, but I think the point is that just all that has really nothing to do with the discussion.
Yeah.
It seems like is my takeaway from that.
I agree.
But
well, if we dismiss
brought this up, there's actually. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
The only thing I'm saying is if we dismiss this as just a crazy conspiracy theory that you'd have to be dumb to believe, then we're going to lose this opportunity for the whole world to reevaluate and actually get a lot of people caring about what are we doing in labs. How safe is it really? Is it appropriate?
Do you think we can do that? Because I think that's a perfectly reasonable conversation that we can have. Do you think there's a way to have that conversation without centering it on COVID-19 and without empowering anti-science wackadoos that are in charge of the US government right now?
It wasn't happening, so now it is. And I think that's a good thing.
But at the same time, we also have people who are like
this is going to hang on, Jackson.
Vaccines, and
Yeah, I mean, this is not an isolated thing. This is now going to be used as ammunition for anti-science crusaders who want to keep people unable to critically evaluate information so they can lie to them for political power. Like this is part of now a right-wing political project to undermine politically inconvenient facts. And this is not, you can have all of your very specific, very good faith, well-intentioned, valid critiques of lab practices and virus handling and whatnot.
Yep.
But the fact that we're using COVID as the entryway into this conversation is feeding a right-wing anti-science narrative that will be and is currently actively being used to undermine the pursuit of science writ large, science education writ large, and science-based policy. And, whether you think that there's validity to the critiques about how the messaging and whatnot was handled in the early COVID pandemic, in 2025, right now, we have no information that indicates in any way that the lab leak is a thing that happened. We have tons of information that it didn't happen and that the virus came from a naturally occurring population. And the people most prominently, most vocally pushing against the scientific consensus, their stated goal, they're not like hiding the ball on this, like their stated goal, they wrote a book on it, is to undermine like the funding of science, the pursuit of science, in order to basically sweep scientific facts that contradict their, political goals out of the public consciousness. And so there's like right now, more than half of the population in the United States thinks that the lab leak is the origin of COVID. That is scientific and journalistic malpractice. And this conversation saying, well, we don't know, they could be lying, we don't have all the data, that feeds into this.
True. We don't have all the data.
Right, but there are so many places in
always,
science
it's always the case.
and
You
say
always have
we don't have all. Hang on one second. There are so many places in science we could point to and say we don't have all the data. Let's look closely at these practices. Let's examine whether people are actually spending this money the way they're supposed to be. There are so many ways we can do that are not highly politically charged, that don't feed into the right-wing misinformation machine. So in like just putting the science aside, and I would sit here and talk viral phylogenetics all day long, but putting that aside, picking this hill to die on as the thing to focus on to like highlight scientific malfeasance does an enormous disservice to the pursuit of science, the communication of science, the public's general like ability to parse information. Because what we're doing is we're basically teaching the public that you can't trust data that we have that we can rely on. I mean, and there's something weird going on.
To Dan's point, there have been a series of like crises that flowed from this one, for instance, right? I mean, we've seen a massive uptick in anti-vaxxers. We've seen a massive surge in like people taking ivermectin or hydrochloroquine, which results in some people dying. Like the climate right now generally is extremely anti-intellectual, anti-science, anti-vax.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of this, it comes from, well, the Lancet letter isn't the origin of this claim coming from the left. It's the origin of this claim coming from scientists. And that letter was bullshit.
But I mean, certainly you don't agree that even if you disagree with that like all of the things that have flowed from that were like, were correct or necessary, right?
No, but it's like,
it's not just pushback against him, against the guy who wrote the letter. We've seen as a result of this, a pushback against like all of science. Like,
yeah, but this was earned because people like us didn't stand up and talk about that. Like, I feel bad that I didn't. I mean, I did pretty quick on. I did. Like the day that I published that animation, I also published an article about this the
Jon
stuff.
Do you really believe that it was earned? I mean, like
yes, it was incredibly dishonest. It was manipulation. It was very deep gaslighting. It was really ugly.
So
I mean, I don't see anything like it.
I don't agree that calling people, which they use emotive language to refer to certain groups of people as like conspiracy theorists or whatever. I don't think that justifies the degree of like anti-vax sentiment that we've seen, which has resulted in the deaths of numerous people at this point. Like, I don't think that was earned. I don't think that the loss of faith that the public had or has in science has or flowed from that letter in particular. It seems to flow very largely because we could have a conversation about, was that particular person who wrote that letter, who wrote, you know, the Lancet letter, correct? Were they right? Were they wrong?
no.
We can debate the facts that are within that letter, but at the end of the day,
it's
what has happened from this is that, like, right wingers, as Dan was saying, use that letter as a pretext to assault all of science and have gotten people killed as a result. I don't think any of us or any of the people out there who have caused or have been the victim of that, I don't think any of them deserve that.
I don't think people deserve it, but we handed this to them. Like, the left has been failing, just handing stuff over. It's been so frustrating to watch American politics because we keep doing this. We keep just.
It can be frustrating, yes.
We keep.
We can agree on the frustration of American politics, but what the point that last point that I was making there is, you know, regarding the frustration of American politics. One of my eternal frustrations is the fact that one of the two viable political parties is and has been fundamentally anti-science, and this giving credence to the lab leak right now and looking retrospectively and saying, well, you know, this was manipulation, this was gaslighting, that feeds into the narrative of science is bad, science is wrong, you shouldn't trust scientists.
Do you think we should just sweep it under the rug?
I think we should be honest about, I just pulled up, because I have all this stuff here, I just pulled up a paper from 2020, Sun et al. 2020, with a phylogenetic tree of coronaviruses with 10 isolates of SARS coronavirus 2 with bootstrapping values of 99, with the sister clade is 2 sequences of bat SARS-like coronavirus. Like, this was in mid-2020. We had the data showing that this thing came from bat populations. And you could, obviously, we had the lab sequences from 2018. Now, if the conversation had been, well, the lab isn't releasing all the sequences, yada, 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 then sure, we would have uncovered that. I think it's been 5 years and we would have uncovered that by now, as we did in the past cases where that type of stuff happened, right? That was in 2020. And at the time this was happening, this was also when, you know, these papers were being written and this data was being analyzed. This was when the famous, I think it was a Slack chat among a bunch of evolutionary biologists was going on. And they were grappling with this about, like, what do we know? We need to look into this. This is really serious. Like, it was, all of these conversations were happening at the same time that we were collecting the data and analyzing it. And, you know, look, I'm pretty far down these rabbit holes. I have not read all 200 whatever pages of those Slack chats, right? But from my understanding of what people who have read all of them is that over months that these conversations were happening, the consensus evolved in real time from, oh, this is a really serious possibility that we need to look into, to, okay, we have all these data. It's very clearly from natural bat populations. We need to find exactly which one, right? And that happened.
Just to be clear, a natural bat population, this lab was working with natural bat viruses. So that doesn't, I don't see how that's.
Well, but that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Well,
with,
then,
like,
right,
if a person got infected and then went to work, you know, and then it wasn't a lab leak, then it was just a person got
research.
Infected.
Well, I mean,
that's happened before.
Know how to
right?
Protect themselves when they're collecting viruses. So
yeah, I mean, that's
it would
happened
be
before,
a research-related leak, which is
it's not a field exposure isn't the same as a lab leak. I mean, there have been there have been researchers that have gotten Lassa. There were some researchers who got infected with Lassa virus in the course of the discovery of Lassa virus when they were collecting samples. What was the one? I don't remember the name of the virus, but it was in South America and it had to do with rodents that were infected. And there was some researchers that were infected with that. I forget the name of it. It's in the book called The Coming Plague. It's if you wanted to watch me flip through The Coming Plague for 20 minutes, I'm sure I could find it. But there have been field exposure events where researchers have gotten infected over the course of like sampling natural populations. That is a thing that has happened. It might have been hantavirus. Thank you. I think you're right. I think it was hantavirus. Thank you. I believe that's correct. So that's a thing that has happened before, but that's different from a lab leak where you have samples stored in the lab and you're doing stuff with them and someone gets exposed as a result of doing the stuff with the stuff in the lab.
Also,
that's a different thing.
I don't think we are proposing that like a virologist just stop collecting samples, right? Like even though there is a risk, like the virologists are well aware of the risk, but I don't think they should be stopped doing that because there is a value in learning.
There's definitely, we should do that. Yeah, that's
in 2014 there was an argument. I think it was David Reelman making the argument. He was saying that certainly we should stop creating chimeras. He did not like that. I don't know if you know who David Reelman is, but he's been a virologist doing this stuff for a long time. In 2014, he says that when making chimeras is inappropriate, we're making things that don't even exist in the wild. Doing the wild virus collecting is debatable. What I believe it was him who suggested this. Instead of doing actual wild virus collecting, why don't we just survey the heck out of hospitals, especially near the frontier between human populations and animal populations? Because that way, and the debate
is an answer to that if you want.
The debate is that, well, we won't be as ready.
Yeah, so, exactly. You find stuff in nature before it infects us so we can prepare, like here are 8 potential vaccine targets that we may have to deal with in the next decade. Like yes, that's why you do that. Yeah.
And I haven't heard a good, I'm sure someone's done it by now, but there must be a good analysis to, did that research help with COVID? Maybe it did. Maybe it helped.
I can't speak to COVID on that, but there have been other cases with antibiotic resistance, for example, where there have been in the lab, we've generated novel resistance genotypes, and then those resistance genotypes have subsequently appeared clinically years later. So we have it, we say, oh, this is a thing, and then it does appear, and when it appears, it's not new, we can deal with it, right? So I can't speak to viruses or COVID specifically, but with bacteria, we've done that, yeah.
That's passage experiments, right? Where you're trying to get it to evolve immunity to a drug.
I'm trying to think of the 2 papers I can think of. I believe it was serial passaging with increasing concentrations of whatever the antibiotic was. Yeah.
Because one of the problems that David Reelman was bringing up, he said that these labs
are... Well, hang on. Can we just, before we go down this rabbit hole, can we just establish what this has to do with the origins of COVID in terms of lab versus not?
Okay. What it has to do with the origins of the COVID is we suddenly find ourselves in a position where there's a bunch of momentum to talk about the safety and value of different virology research projects. What is appropriate, what's not, what types of people, what qualities should they have that are leading this to avoid a pandemic from happening. So we think this came from the market. So they say that they changed how they do markets. I don't know that they have change it enough, but there needs to be a conversation on that. How do you sell these animals in a safer way, or should they just be banned completely? That's a conversation that needs to be had. And the other conversation that needs to be had is, how do we make actual virology research safer? And there's a bunch of momentum right now. And so I do think, we can complain about all the anti-science stuff happening, but also we can exploit this momentum and have this conversation, because it is millions of lives we're talking about. I mean, we now know how bad pandemics can be.
Do you think, well, I mean, we've got 1918. That was possibly 100 million is about where, I mean, it was 50 million directly documented, but clearly we were undercounting. So 100 million is a pretty good estimate for 1918. That's pretty bad, right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty bad. I don't know the number for the AIDS pandemic, but that's up there. Obviously SARS coronavirus 2 is up there. So I guess my question is this, because again, we've strayed very far from the actual, where did the virus come from? But like, given the fact that we're acknowledging that this conversation will be exploited to undermine the practice of science, which is the thing ostensibly we're trying to improve and defend here, is that trade-off worth it? You're saying there are potentially millions of deaths if there's a pandemic and whatever due to unsafe laboratory practices. I want to emphasize again first, that has never happened before. But currently happening in the present is many, many, many deaths. We can't quantify it because, it's not something you could just specifically quantify, but we can say for sure that there are many deaths happening. Like, you could just do the natural experiments between high vaccination states and cities and low vaccination states and cities, and you could pretty reasonably quantify like how many excess COVID deaths there were due to this kind of anti-science stuff going
And
on.
that has been done.
And
red states pull ahead, and red counties also pull ahead by quite a lot.
It's a lot. And so is it worth it to like have this esoteric, like, oh, we need to clean up our viral collection and storage practices? Is it worth it to have that conversation at the expense of 65% of the United States adult population believing something is a fact for which there is no evidence and for which there are like actually health and well-being consequences? Like, is that a fair trade-off? Like, no, I don't think people who want to clean up viral collection practices should ally themselves with anti-science lunatics in order to like get your pet project through about scientific communication and like, keeping track of grant money and making sure we're collecting viruses from bat populations more safely. Like, I don't think that's a good trade-off. That seems like a really bad trade-off because it's not just going to stick with viruses also. This is going to undermine climate change policies. This is going to undermine childhood vaccination policies, right? There's a million other places. I mean, we're talking about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, which have literally saved tens of millions of lives from respiratory disease. And like, we can that's something we actually can quantify. And we're talking about undoing that stuff, right? That seems like a really awful trade-off to me. And so I think we need to be really careful about who we invite into our tent when we're having this conversation. And inviting like the Joe Rogan conspiracy theorists to be on our side as we try to clean up the practice of science is a really bad idea.
But you're saying that we shouldn't talk about this because...
No, I think we should talk about it in the scientific community. I don't think we should be blabbing out there on random letters and podcasts and whatnot and like allying our cause, trying to make science better, with their cause of trying to tear down science, because in this one small thing, there are a few people who can find common ground.
John, so I think you're trying to look at like the positives. You're both trying to look at like at the way that this has kind of flowered out, right? So
it is how it is.
You're trying to look at the positives, and Dan's saying like, is this worth it? My own kind of perspective from what I've seen on this is that the people who are using this, and this is my own experience, but the people who are using this to say, we don't know everything about it, so the lab leak is possible, are overwhelmingly not doing what you're doing, right, John? They're overwhelmingly saying we can't trust the scientific method, we can't trust scientists, and so we need to do something else. We need to have a different intelligentsia that is not the mainstream, right? I mean, you can acknowledge like that's most of the people who talk about this are not, as we're doing, talking about fixing what we see as problems with the way that viruses are stored and studied, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Well, the vast majority of individual people, no, people are talking about it because it's
yeah, it's not just little people, but yeah, it's like Joe Rogan, it's I can't think of anyone else offhand, but you know who I'm talking about. These RFK, these sorts of people, they're all only talking about this in terms of we can't trust the scientific establishment, not in terms of here's how we can better our virology institutes, right? Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that?
Well, both things are happening, and that's actually the public interest forces a political interest, which forces investigations, and they're the ones funding.
I mean, that's true.
So there's a bunch of good stuff that comes.
But do you agree with the question that Jackson asked? Right? Do you agree with that?
The vast majority of people talking about this are just wrapped up in the crazy,
like anti-vax stuff. Yeah,
craziness.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems to me that it wasn't worth it then, right? At least on the public scale, if we can study these viruses, in a better way, a safer way, whatever, that's great. But that's drowned out against the overwhelming masses of people who are like vaccine hesitant now, for instance, and that doesn't seem to me to be a fair trade-off.
I don't think vaccine hesitancy comes from talking about lab leaks.
Sure, it does. If these people are thinking that like that we can't trust researchers because they're hiding evidence for the lab leak, or they're not treating it fairly, whatever, then that translates to, well, we can't trust scientists. We can't trust scientists. Why am I taking the vaccine for this thing? Like, I have Joe Rogan has this, and I know he's a bad example, but he has this quote that I've seen used a lot, in which he says, before, he says something to the effect of like, before the pandemic, I agreed that we went to the moon, and then after the pandemic, he's like, I don't know if we can trust vaccines or whatever now.
Yeah.
All right. And he's not the only person like that. I do know other people in like my own life who are like that, who never had a second thought about MMR, or whatever before. And then suddenly, and even nurses, this includes nurses too, which is deeply sad. But then during COVID, they're being ideologically captured by people who are like, well, I'm just asking questions, I'm just trying to follow the evidence, whatever, which is all well and good, but they weren't doing it in good faith, right? And those people misled a lot of other people who are now like, I shouldn't get the vaccine. I shouldn't give give any vaccines to my children and things like that.
Yeah. Something that I've seen, like in the comments on my YouTube channel, because some of my videos have millions of views, so I feel like I can get a fair feel of American ideas. But I've seen we went from pseudoscience to anti-science during COVID. So people used to pretend to be like scientists in order to make an argument. Now they just attack the scientific endeavor in general. That's a big shift that I've seen.
And do you think the push that, like the case that you're making about the validity of looking into these practices and everything, do you think that's helping that situation or hurting that situation?
I think it's for people to see that there's actual transparency and people who care about these things. What we saw with COVID.
Well, hang on. So you think it's helping, though, that you think that when people hear this is a plausible idea that we can't rule out there because we don't have full access to the data, and we need to closely examine these practices, whatever, right? You make this argument. It is your position that is helping push back against the anti-science thing that is going on rather than contribute to it.
Absolutely.
I disagree vehemently.
Admitting that people were exaggerating with the hardcore attack against lab leak early on. Admitting that, like, this is what Francis Collins is going around. He's on a tour right now. He's written a book about this. He's
singing songs about the cosmos.
He's being invited to talk to people and who didn't agree with them. They thought that he's just lying and covering everything up, and they're now saying that he's very transparent about things. Like,
but here's the thing. But I've seen this with this Francis Collins PR tour that he's doing right now. Mm-hmm. I have seen this turned around to being like, see, he says they were lying. We can't trust them. It's because most people doing this, John, are not like you. Most people are doing this in bad faith. They don't give a flying about what Francis Collins says. They want to use him as a figurehead to undermine the practice of science, right? And like, I'm all for having whatever conversation we want to have about the way science is practiced. Let me tell you, I got a lot of problems with the way science is communicated, with the way science is practiced, with the fact that big names in the field curtail research in their fields, with the way peer review is done, how the whole publishing industry is built on free labor.
Let's throw out textbooks while we're at it.
Let's throw out textbooks while we're at it.
Are a scam.
I have a lot of problems with all of those things. We can have those conversations without giving ammunition to anti-science quacks who want to tear down the entire establishment. And putting aside the conversation about the origins, because we agree on what the data shows, right? Putting that aside, what my problem with this, the way the lab leak conversation is happening right now, is we're doing it in such a way that we are facilitating the people who would erase our ability to do science, right? We are helping them accomplish that goal. No matter how good faith you're being or Francis Collins is being, no matter how important those conversations are, the effect of doing a PR tour about how we messed up early in COVID, and I agree, we did not have a good response to early COVID, right? There were a lot of problems with our early response to COVID. Doing a PR tour to that effect and going around apologizing for it rather than saying, hey, science doesn't always get it right on the first try, that doesn't help make science better. That makes it worse because it empowers the people who would tear it down. And I
think that repentance needs to happen in that, and part of that is apologizing for what was done wrong. You have this public view of science. That reputation is deeply damaged by COVID. A lot of it was inevitable. If you have a pandemic, inevitably your reputation is going to get screwed. I think everyone who was in power during the pandemic lost power right afterwards. Almost every single politician did. It is impossible to keep your reputation. It was a horrible thing. It sucked for everybody, and they want a scapegoat. But I do think
don't hand them one. That's what I'm saying. Don't hand them a scapegoat.
No, but I think that apologizing and repentance is a real thing. It's part of the healing process. It's part of recovery. And you might disagree, but I
think that's perfectly fair. But what are we apologizing for? Because I think there's a lot of like retrospectives that need to be written about what the response to this pandemic was policy-wise versus what the response to original SARS versus the response to the 2009 swine flu pandemic, the 2014 West Africa Ebola outbreak. Like, I think there is a lot of introspection that needs to be done about our responses to those various pandemics. The commonly held position right now that there was this curtailing of the debate among evolutionary virologists, and there was a suppression of evidence that pointed to a lab leak early in the pandemic. I'm an evolutionary virologist. Like, this is my field. I keep tabs on the field. Like, I know that, like, this is the thing that I like follow in science, right? There were months of debate in the field over where this stuff came from, and nobody was ostracized or laughed at or told they couldn't do whatever based on saying, hey, it might have come from a lab. We really need to look into that, right? So even this representation of the early pandemic as like this censorious, everybody has to get in line kind of thing is wrong. Now, there were public policies. There were public policies in terms of things like what Facebook or YouTube would permit, but those are private companies that are making those decisions, right? That's not the conversation that's happening in the scientific establishment among the people practicing the field of epidemiology and evolutionary virology. And if Facebook and Twitter want to go out there and say, hey, we're sorry, we should not have moderated our content in such a way, sure, I'm not going to second guess them on that decision. That's fine. But for the scientific community to say, we were gaslighting, we were doing this Orwellian stuff, like, that is not only counterproductive because it gives ammunition to the bad guys, it's also not true on the merits.
It's literally true.
It's literally not, John. This is my field. I know the people in it, and I have these conversations.
I watched it happen. I lived it. I watched it happen.
You had one video demonetized, John. That's not the same thing. I'm talking like the people in the field, like Eddie Holmes' name comes up in
the emails of the orchestration by Peter Daszak to stop.
He wasn't working on this. He was working on SARS coronavirus 1. And he got his grant pulled. Like, that is not relevant to the origins of COVID and the discussion in the community of what was happening that led to that outbreak. That is not relevant.
Let me show you this set of slides.
I'm not going to sit here for the slides. I don't want to do. No, we're not going to go through the Peter Daszak slides. It's a waste of time. It's not
okay. If you don't want to look at it, you don't have to. You can live in La La Land.
I literally read about this stuff all the time.
He did a
John,
it was absurd.
You guys were all yelling over each other.
It was disgusting, and there needs to be like an apology for this.
Here's the thing.
Why
Here's the
people
thing.
are so upset with science. This is a lot of
You are an
people
excellent.
reasonable saw this and were super disgusted by it, and for good reason. It was absurd. I've never seen anything this ugly. Like, I was depressed by it when I watched it happen. It was depressing. Like, my wife can
You
tell
are
you.
an
It was like
excellent
months.
scientific communicator, John, and you could do so much good with this enormous platform that you have. But like, making this a hill to die on
It's
is
not a hill to die on. He literally lied to
hurting.
people. He orchestrated this
hurting.
thing. It's absurd.
What did he orchestrate? What papers did he publish?
Bring up
What
the
papers
slide.
did he quash?
Bring up the slides.
What
I'll show ya.
papers? No, name a paper. Name a paper that he quashed that would have shown like a laboratory origin.
Bring up the
Like
slides,
what?
I'll show ya.
What? No, don't. No, just tell me the name of the paper.
He orchestrated the Lancet letter, which convinced the media that the lab leak was a conspiracy and that it should be shut down everywhere. That the influence of that letter is estimated to have lasted for about a year, and it completely silenced people from being able to talk about this publicly. It was orchestrated by him.
What was the publication date of that letter?
It was. It's in my slides.
What? Just let me Google it real fast. What's the publication? If anyone know, chat. What's the publication date of the Lancet letter?
It was 2020. Yeah, I remember.
It was in
this.
2020. Okay, so that was that. What was the date? It was what 20? Because you're saying it quashed the
February 19th, 2020.
It quashed the conversation. That conversation was happening. Like
it was starting to happen. It was starting to happen, and he killed it.
No, it wasn't starting to happen. It had been happening since February and March and January. Like it had been happening. It didn't. I'm telling. Like this is the thing. We're saying this letter quashed a conversation that had been going on for months before the letter was published. That's not possible.
Also, like this paper was published after the proximal origins paper that was.
Yeah, that's something else we talk about.
We can't hear you.
Something else that was also orchestrated, but paper. This letter did the most.
We missed most of that.
Sorry, what?
You roboted out, Nestle. We didn't hear any of that. He may have lost internet again.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, anyway, okay, you were saying, John?
Sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry,
yes, we can hear you now. Say that one more time.
This Lancet paper or letter was published after the proximal origins paper on Nature.
Yes. Yeah, the 1-2 punch.
Yes, we heard that
conversation. And yeah, both of those things.
So do you think it's so? So there was a paper that had very strong data saying it came from this natural populations spillover zoonosis, right? And then there's a letter subsequently published that says this looks like a pretty open and shut case. We should focus on that. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, there's a robust debate happening among the people in the field actually doing this work, trying to figure it out. There's nothing about that letter that stopped the debate.
Absolutely. It did in public. In public, people were silenced. They were shut down. They were not allowed to talk about this.
What does the letter say? What does the letter say?
The letter calls lab origins a conspiracy twice. And then it talks about, and then you have every news organization saying, Tom Cotton spouts off conspiracy theories. So it was the tagline, and people would reference this letter over and over and over again to just say that basically everything that the right was saying was crazy.
Was there any incorrect data? Was there any incorrect data in the letter? Like, was it leaning on anything that was wrong that we subsequently learned?
Yes. So like he hid the fact that he was in he was working with the lab. So
that's not relevant though. Did it obscure any sequence data? Was there any hard data that it was suppressed?
He manipulated the public message with this letter. He hid the fact from anyone reading this that he was actually affiliated with the lab that was getting blamed for this stuff. He orchestrated this specifically to get people off Wiv's back, and something needed to happen because people were getting death threats already. Something needed to happen, But what he did is he just gaslighted everyone, saying you're crazy if you think this is possible. It pitted the left against the right, because the Republicans had been saying there's this lab and this is a concern. And the Democrats immediately picked this up. They said, "Oh, science says no."
So, John,
Which was
the
accurate.
question
Which was
that
accurate
Dan
that science said
is
no.
Not
asking,
accurate.
the question that Dan is
We
asking,
agree that it's accurate that
is-
science says no.
the question Dan is asking
Not in
is
February
anything-
19th.
Well, is anything in so the letter by Daszak, Dan is saying that nothing in the letter is wrong about, for instance, like the biogeography of the outbreak, of the phylogenetics of the outbreak. That's what Dan is asking about. He's not asking about what the public responded with. He's asking about the science that was referenced.
Was there
within
anything wrong?
the paper.
The letter just condemns the lab leak hypothesis as a conspiracy theory. That's what it does.
Okay, so
At
I
that
hear you.
time,
Okay,
was
so
completely
one scientist
inappropriate.
voiced his opinion, and that was bad. I'm willing to say,
Yes.
sure, that's fine. He shouldn't have done that. Great. Is that a reason to like all the yeah, sure, fine. Let's say that that's improper. One scientist
Yeah.
voicing his opinion based on whatever data are available at the time, right?
It was not one scientist.
Okay.
He was orchestrating it, and he specifically, there's emails now where he was getting some people to sign it. He had other people not sign it because he didn't want it to get linked to the Wuhan lab. You have this is what people on the right, they're like, I'm mad because you told me this was a conspiracy theory when it wasn't. And now I have a bunch of emails showing that you were doing this in cahoots with a bunch of people. It's super sketchy.
But that's the thing. They believe that the evidence is in favor of the lab leak. But as we've all agreed multiple times in this conversation, there is no evidence in favor of that. That's what they're mad about. I agree when you say that they're saying, that the Republicans, for instance, are saying, you told me there was no evidence for the lab leak. And like I said, we agree, there is no evidence for the lab leak. But they're saying, the Republicans are saying there is evidence. We're all lying when we say there's no evidence. That's what
And they were lying then.
Yeah,
when
that
they
the
said there was no
scientists were
evidence,
lying about that.
which
yeah.
we agree is not true.
We agree it was not true. What?
We agree that the scientists weren't lying about the data that was presented.
Right.
In February 19th. Well, the proximal origins letter was also very sketchy because the way that things are worded is technically true, but in a misdirecting sense.
But I mean, that paper also made a series of predictions that did turn out to be true later. For instance, the proximal origins paper predicted that we would find polybasic cleavage sites in other beta coronaviruses, which we did. That was a confirmed, a gold standard prediction, going back to the deep lore there, of that paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm aware, there's nothing in that paper that is incorrect given our later understanding.
It was mostly this Lancet letter that really it made everybody scared to be labeled a conspiracy theorist if they were worried about this very reasonable thing.
But
so, it has been standard practice since at least 2001 for the World Health Organization.
Well, hold on, let John finish.
It's been standard practice since at least 2001, but probably, I mean, even with HIV, we even did this, to assume when there's a new pandemic, you assume it might be natural, it might be a lab leak, it might be a bioweapon. These are the three starting points every time now.
Okay.
And this is written into protocol now, and since 2001. Michael Warby went to Africa looking for this with HIV, and actually William Hamilton died during that trip. This is normal. And instead of just telling people, hey, this is normal, let us figure this out, we said, you're a conspiracy theorist. Screw you.
I just want to be
super inappropriate.
Well, I just want to. Okay, so you could let's concede the point that that's an inappropriate thing to do. Let's say that that's inappropriate. Fine.
And it was an inappropriate policy decision. We can just agree on all that.
Let's say that those Slack chats, those famous Slack chats now with Eddie Holmes and all those other. I forget how many people are in them, but those months of going through and hey, we gotta figure. That was this letter was, you said February, whatever the date was, February whatever
19
in 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then those Slack chats didn't just stop then. They didn't go, okay, we got our ducks in a row, we're done now. No, they kept going, and there's concern in there over the possibility of a lab leak. So my point here is that it is wrong to say that the Lancet letter cut off this conversation. It like, we have literal chat logs showing that the debate over the lab leak persisted after that letter was published, right? And that debate
never
happened.
public conversation, and
But that's not where science happens. Science doesn't happen on YouTube. Science happens in labs
Right.
among scientists.
And again, we've agreed that the paper itself, we can say that the letter itself was not appropriate, and that the
Let's say
policy,
that,
and even
sure.
you can say like the
It
policy
didn't-
by like Meta and YouTube, etc., were also inappropriate. You can say all of those are inappropriate, but it doesn't negate any of the actual like facts of the substance of COVID.
And the scientific debates that occurred subsequently. Those debates were not curtailed.
but what it did is it absolutely destroyed public's trust in scientists. It was devastating to our reputation. It was absolutely devastating, and it is just given fuel and fuel and fuel.
So, John, can I draw another analogy? What this kind of sounds like is we're blaming, let's say justifiably, we're blaming this one guy, Daszak. Okay, so we're blaming him for the failure of public policy that occurred later. Okay, fine, well and good. Okay, so we agree on that, but blaming we're essentially saying it's okay that everyone, normal people, it's okay that normal people and Republicans and so on don't trust scientists anymore because of this one guy. But that's really, really similar to an argument that we frequently come into contact with, like the Piltdown Man, right? Like creationists often say, well, you can't trust anything that comes out of anthropology because one time the Piltdown Man happened, right? But like that's not a good argument, right? Or the Archaeoraptor, whatever. Like the fact that there are people who behaved inappropriately doesn't mean that we have to throw out the whole scientific consensus, right? I think we all agree on that.
Also, but in the case of the Piltdown Man, somebody actively engaged in fraud. Like we know that at least one person. What was the name of the person again called?
Or Piltdown Man? It was the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes. Yeah.
No, there's one suspect, but I think the main guy was not on the different.
But the fact of the matter is,
we know there was fraud. We know there was fraud, but in this case, the issue seems to be or at least a group of scientists led by Peter Daszak stating their opinion that the lab leak is a conspiracy theory. That's it. That's it. Like I'm beginning to question like how can such a thing have a negative
You can dismiss it, but it caused actual policy all over the United States that pissed off millions of people. So
should we practice science based on how it pisses people off?
It was a huge deal to a lot of people.
We can agree with that, but we don't make policy around, or I should say, we shouldn't make policy, especially science-related policy, around how people feel about it, right? We should do it with regard to whether or not it's true. I mean, like that's the point, right?
But so I'm pointing this out because it is a failure on our part. This is a failure, and it's something that we have power to stop stuff like this from happening in the future. Like,
sure,
we're some of the guys that do this, right? I did not call this out hard. Like, I noticed it, and it upset me. I was depressed. I didn't call it out very hard. I wrote an article on my website, which, like, I could have done a lot more, and it bothers me that I did not.
John, can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, let you finish before I interject. Sorry.
Like, these are the types of things that we're doing that are inappropriate. We let this stuff go. We don't treat it as if it's a big deal. It is a big deal. Like, we have to repent for this.
Well, we can say that's a big deal.
Yeah,
we can agree on that.
Okay.
But again, we can all agree on that. I'm 100% behind you on this point, but I don't think that's the fault of the scientific community writ large. It is the fault of this one guy who did this, and it's not the fault of every virologist who did this. It's not the fault of the scientific community, but that's the way it's being taken. It's being taken as, because that's the way creationists take Piltdown Man, is they don't take it as this one guy did.
I have another example.
They cast it as like all of evolutionary biologists for all of time are liars and fraudsters. That's the way they take. That's exactly the way that Republicans are taking this.
Yep.
It's very similar.
I have another example.
Okay,
like
shoot.
you all remember the Dover trial, right?
Oh
How,
yeah.
how
Yeah.
did the judge rule against intelligent design? Intelligent design is basically like I don't think he used this word, but it's basically a conspiracy theory to hide the fact that it was creationism in disguise. But that did not stop the intelligent design movement in its track. So I'm just questioning you, like, how can you possibly believe that one letter in a Lancet article can just stop the discussion on the lab leak entirely like that? Like,
I do also want to point out
to me.
You can actually just
this
watch it.
This is not about the debate. This is about time. Usually
Yeah.
this show goes about 2 hours, and so we got 4 minutes until then.
Okay.
So I don't want to keep you guys here too long. I know you've got lives and families and so on. So
Yeah.
we'll go for a couple more minutes, and then we'll.
This Lancet letter was the first. It was the first thing coming from a scientific organization, the Lancet, right? People don't understand that a letter is not a scientific paper. The general public does not. They see that the Lancet is saying this is a conspiracy theory, and all of a sudden, all the New York Times, Washington Post, everybody just bam, they just jump on that bandwagon, and they just start hammering this home over and over again. Peter Daszak goes on, he gets on 60 Minutes, he goes all over the place hammering it home.
Yeah.
This is why it had such a dramatic impact. It was it really did. I would say it lasted for at least a year, where if you were at all concerned about a lab leak, your post would get deleted. You'd be accused of being a conspiracy theorist, totally crazy. When we have all this, like, no, this is protocol. Like, we have to figure this out. This is one of the legitimate hypotheses right now. So that's what the damage was here, and everybody saw that. They saw that silencing, and it just fueled so much anti-science hatred. Like, I mean, maybe I'm giving more credit to this letter than it deserves, but it certainly it was like a year.
Like, I'm very difficult to see how, like, Peter Daszak specifically, or even him and his associates together can do something like this. Like why would the New York Times care about this opinion in a Lancet article? Like, they shouldn't care.
I mean, I just think it's related specifically to this Lancet letter, given the abysmal track record that scientists have at, like, getting the public to broadly accept their ideas. I find that I think it strains credulity to think that this one letter was able to, like, turn public opinion on a dime and get everybody on the same page for a year. I just that I don't think we have that much power. Like, I don't think any random dude writing in the Lancet has that much power. I just don't.
If it was that easy, if it was that easy,
we would have better climate
there would
policy.
be no conspiracy theories.
That would be nice. Yeah. Okay, so
it really struck a chord with people, and it really did have a huge effect. If you look at articles after that, they were all pointing to this Lancet letter. It's New York Times, Washington Post both went down that rabbit hole, and hard. I mean, they were. It took them a year to be like, whoa, okay, wait a minute. It was kind of a 1-2 punch of that and the other article that came out.
The Nature paper, yeah.
Okay, so we've been going at this for 2 hours now. First of all, I want to say thank you both for coming. I do appreciate it, John and Dan and Nesliga, as always. I do appreciate all of you being here.
Sorry for my internet troubles.
It's okay. It's probably your fault, but I forgive you anyway. John, I do want you to know I do appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and sharing your time with us. It is a very valuable conversation.
Yeah.
Of course. And thank you, Dan, for being here.
If I just want to put this out there, if John wants to continue the conversation, like in writing, I highly propose or recommend the forum Peaceful Science. Like, and maybe you're familiar with that.
Oh yes,
Peaceful
yes.
Science forum.
Oh, Peaceful Science is great.
Yeah, so we can, if you want, we can continue that discussion there.
Okay. Alrighty. And then on that note, thank you everybody who is in the live chat for watching, and we will see all of you next time. So bye, everybody.
So that was my conversation with Jon Perry about COVID origins. Like I said, I found that to be a frustrating conversation, but I hope you found it informative. I hope people can take useful information away from that. Thank you all for watching. Please remember before you go to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, and as always, context is a little different this time, but don't get fooled.